The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we get into it, if you want exclusive lore breakdowns, chapter timelines, and members-only videos that never make it to the main channel, the link is in the description. Everything lives on the Patreon. The bank is marble and cold and older than the Ministry of Magic, which is something the goblins will tell you if you ask, and something they communicate without words if you don't. The floors do not echo, they absorb. The ceilings vault so high, they suggest the architects were not building a room, but making a statement about permanence. Harry does not know any of this yet. He only knows it smells like stone and something metallic, and that the goblins at the long counter do not look up when Hagrid and an 11-year-old boy in clothes 3 sizes too large walk through the bronze doors. Hagrid has been cheerful since King's Cross, easy, big, warm, filling silences with talk about Hogwarts and houses and Quidditch and everything Harry might have known if someone had thought to tell him. Harry has listened. He is good at listening. 11 years of being not worth speaking to will teach a person that. The goblin at the end of the counter is named Griphook. He will not remember this appointment fondly. Harry Potter, Hagrid says, in a voice that carries, because Hagrid's voice always carries, come to access his vault. Vault 687, under the Potter account. Griphook produces the key. Standard vault verification, 1 drop of blood on the bow of the key, just enough to confirm lineage. Then the cart, then the vault. Standard. Harry takes the key. He presses his thumb against the gold bow. A single drop of blood touches the metal. The key begins to dissolve. Not melt, not tarnish. It dissolves, the gold breaking apart from the center outward, the teeth of the key separating into fine particles that drift toward the marble counter and go still before they settle. In 4 seconds, the vault key is gone. There is only Harry's thumb, with a small red bead at its center, and Griphook, who has not moved, who is not blinking, who is looking at the dissolution with the specific stillness of someone who has encountered an outcome they were told was possible but never expected to witness. Griphook says. He reaches under the counter without taking his eyes off Harry. He strikes a small silver bell, twice. The sound does not carry. It simply stops mid-ring, as though the bank absorbed it too. Hagrid says slowly, "Is something wrong?" "No, sir." Said the way people say no when they mean the situation is more complicated than I am authorized to explain to you, but nothing violent is about to occur. If you would wait, please. They wait. Harry holds his thumb in his other hand, not because it hurts, but because it seems like the right thing to do with it. The other goblins at the long counter continue their work without appearing to notice anything. That is, Harry will understand later, the most unsettling part. They know exactly what just happened. They are not surprised. The goblin who emerges from the carved stone door behind the counter is not Griphook. He is older, broader in the chest, wearing robes that suggest authority without announcing it. His eyes go to Harry immediately, with the particular attention of someone confirming a calculation they ran some time ago. "Mr. Potter, my name is Sharpclaw, senior account keeper for dormant estates." A pause, the length of a breath. "Would you follow me, please?" Hagrid rises, half a foot above everyone else in the room. "I meant to stay with him," Dumbledore said. "You are welcome to wait in the consultation room," Sharpclaw says, without looking at Hagrid. He is still looking at Harry. "Mr. Potter alone is required in the verification chamber. It will not take long." Hagrid sits back down. He looks troubled, not afraid. Hagrid does not frighten easily, and he does not yet understand what has happened. He looks troubled in the way a person looks when they realize that the situation they were sent to manage has grown a second floor while they weren't watching. Harry follows Sharpclaw through the stone door. The verification chamber is underground, further down than the cart tunnels, reached by a staircase so old the stone steps have worn smooth at their centers. The room has a single table, 2 chairs, and on the far wall a hanging black fabric, heavy, and at its center, a crest, a shield quartered in silver and green. Stars, not decorative but precise, specific, arranged in a constellation Harry almost recognizes. He sits. Sharpclaw sets a folder on the table. The vault key for Potter family Vault 687 was constructed with a blood confundus, Sharpclaw says. A magical lock that reads lineage and opens only to the correct bloodline. Custom work, commissioned in 1980 by a private party through Gringotts Legal Services. The confundus was designed to dissolve if it detected that the blood presented did not match the primary lineage encoded at construction. Harry is quiet for a moment. "My blood didn't match." "Correct. Whose blood was supposed to be in the lock?" Sharpclaw opens the folder. The Confundus was commissioned by James Fleamont Potter. It was encoded to read his lineage, and his lineage alone as the primary verification for that vault. A pause that has weight in it. You are not James Potter's son, Mr. Potter. The blood Confundus confirms it with the specificity of ancestral magic, which does not make errors. The room is very still. Harry can hear his own heartbeat. Steady. Unremarkable. He notices, with the detached interest of someone observing a reaction from a slight distance, that what he feels is not grief. It is the particular cold clarity of a thing that has always been true, finally being said out loud. Then, whose son am I? Sharpclaw sets a second document on the table. The crest at the top matches the hanging on the wall. Regulus Black, second son of Orion Black and Walburga Black, deceased, 1979. At the time of his death, Regulus Black left no acknowledged heir. The House of Black's primary vault has been in dormancy since. A pause, precise as a full stop. Until today. Harry looks at the constellation on the hanging again. The name comes to him now. Regulus. The star at the heart of Leo. The little king. There's a vault, he says. Not quite a question. There is a vault. Sealed under blood recognition wards since 1979. It has been waiting for direct bloodline contact. Sharpclaw gestures at Harry's hand. Your thumb was sufficient. I want to see it. That is your right. The cart goes further than Harry expects, past the Potter vault, past the numbered doors in the hundreds, and then the 50s, and then into the deeper tunnels where the cart moves slower, not from mechanical necessity, but because the wards here are layered, and each one reads the passengers before allowing passage. Harry can feel them. He doesn't know enough yet to name what he is feeling, but there is a sensation at each ward crossing like a question being answered, like something recognizing him and then stepping aside. The vault door is black iron, no number, only the crest. And below it, in lettering worn smooth by time but still legible, 2 Jews per. The door opens when Harry puts his hand to the metal. No key required. Only what he is. He goes in alone. It is not what he expected. He grew up in a house where accumulation signals importance, where the number of things a person owns is the measure of their worth. The Black family vault contains no pile of gold, no tower of jewels. It is organized. Cases along the left wall, labeled in fading ink. Instruments on a shelf, sealed in glass. Books in a locked case, their spines marked with the family crest. And at the center of the room, on a table of black stone, a single sealed chest. The seal on the chest is the crest. When Harry's hand touches it, the seal opens without sound. Inside, a letter. 1 page folded 3 times. The handwriting on the front reads only, "For whoever wears our blood." Harry unfolds it. To whoever wears our blood, I did not think there would be a son. I am glad. I am sorry. Both are true. By the time you read this, you will have been told a version of what happened. I cannot know which version. I only know that I had a narrow window, and I used it to make you safe in the only way I knew how, which required making you invisible, even to yourself. The Confundus on the Potter vault was my work. James agreed. He is a better man than certain circles would have you believe, and he understood that a hidden heir is a living heir. What I am asking you to carry is not a burden. It is an account. The House of Black has kept records of everything. Debts incurred, debts owed. Promises made in the dark that the light never witnessed. You will find them. You will learn to read them. And when the time comes, the magic will know what to do, because it has been waiting considerably longer than you have. I did not survive the cave. I knew I would not. That was the price, and I paid it without regret, because it was mine to pay. You are the interest on that investment. Do not waste it. R.A.B. Harry reads it twice. He folds it along its original creases and puts it in his shirt pocket. Then he sits on the floor of the vault with his back against the black stone table. The room is very quiet. The wards outside have settled. He is, in this moment, the only living Black and the oldest Black property in existence. He was never James Potter's miracle. He was Regulus Black's plan, hidden before birth to survive what Regulus knew was coming. Harry doesn't feel chosen. He feels deployed. The difference is important. He understands that, even if he cannot yet say why. He comes back up from the vault 40 minutes after he went in. Sharpclaw is waiting. Hagrid is sitting in the corridor outside the consultation room with his hands folded, wearing the expression of a man who has realized the conversation he was sent to prevent has already happened. Sharpclaw sets one more document on the table. Gringotts is required. under Ministry protocol, to notify the Department of Magical Law Enforcement of any lineage awakening involving a previously dormant noble house. The notification window is 48 hours from verification. Harry looks at him. He is 11 years old. He is wearing a shirt that belonged to Dudley Dursley. He has been in the wizarding world for approximately 3 hours. He reads the last line of Regulus's letter again in his head. The House of Black has kept records of everything. The House of Black does not notify the Ministry, Harry says, flatly, without heat. A correction, not a challenge. The Ministry notifies us that precedent is in your own records. He holds Sharpclaw's gaze. Look it up. Sharpclaw looks at him for a long moment. Then he opens a second folder, one that was already on the table, which Harry now understands was not coincidental. He looks it up. The precedent exists. 1732. House of Black versus the Department of Magical Oversight. Noble houses of founding-era status are exempt from active Ministry notification on matters of internal lineage succession. The Ministry notifies. It does not receive. The notification does not happen. Sharpclaw closes the folder. He says with the precise cadence of a goblin who has made a decision, "Welcome to Gringotts, Lord Black." Harry stands. He puts Regulus's letter back in his shirt pocket. He walks out through the stone door, past Hagrid, who rises immediately and begins asking questions that Harry answers in short, careful sentences, giving away nothing that matters. Behind him, in the vault that waited 12 years, the chest sits open and empty. The account has begun. Harry had a compartment to himself for the first 40 minutes. He used them to read, not a school book but a short handwritten pamphlet he had found in the Black family vault, wedged between 2 larger volumes on ward theory. The title was just a date. September 1980. The text was in Regulus's handwriting, compressed and precise, the pen strokes of a person who wrote quickly because they were always short on time. It was notes on concealment, specifically the magical practice of presenting an incomplete version of yourself to ancient detection instruments, scrying bowls, truth glasses, and notably artifacts of the hat family which Regulus had apparently researched with some care. The hat cannot be deceived, the notes read, but it responds to what the wearer values, not what the wearer conceals. If there is no lie, only a choice of emphasis, the hat will work with what it has. Harry put the pamphlet in his robe pocket when the compartment door opened and Ron Weasley arrived, looking for somewhere to sit. Ron was easy. That was the first thing Harry noticed. Not easy in the sense of simple, but easy in the sense of uncomplicated. He said what he was thinking. He was nervous and tried not to show it and wasn't very good at that either. He stared at Harry's scar for a moment, went pink, and then talked enthusiastically about nearly headless Nick in order to cover the staring, which Harry found more charming than the staring itself would have been. He liked Ron. That also was a first. Most people who had met Harry had been trying to decide what he was worth. Ron Weasley was just passing time on a train. The hall was exactly as large as the Black family text said it would be. Harry walked in behind the other first years and did what he had spent the summer training himself not to do, and did it anyway. He assessed the room. Entry points. The 4 long tables arranged so that each house could observe the other 3. The staff table elevated above the rest, a political choice, not a decorative one. The candles overhead charmed to remain stable, a demonstration of sustained wandless magic at scale. He stopped himself. Beside him, a girl with dark curly hair was murmuring something under her breath about the ceiling enchantment being consistent with a complex self-renewing meteorological charm. She had a book open in one hand and was reading it while walking. Harry looked at her for a moment and then looked away. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool at the front of the hall, old enough that the brim had developed creases from centuries of being set down. Also, Harry reminded himself, something that read minds. He was not afraid of this exactly. He had a plan. McGonagall called names alphabetically. Harry watched the hat touch each head and the faces beneath it, the small shifts of expression that happened during the private conversation no one else in the hall could hear. Some students looked frightened. One looked peaceful. Hermione Granger, when her name was called, sat on the stool with her back very straight, and the expression of someone treating this as an entrance examination she intended to pass. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The red and gold table erupted. She walked to her seat looking satisfied. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet in a way the other names had not produced. Harry walked to the stool, sat, and felt the brim drop over his eyes. The darkness behind the hat was immediate and total. Well, the hat said, not with sound but with something adjacent to it, a voice that occurred inside his skull rather than arriving at his ears. Well, that's interesting, is it? Harry did not phrase it as a question. Two of you in here, boy. The hat sounded engaged rather than alarmed, the way a scholar sounds when they open a text they expected to be straightforward and find it isn't. I don't mean madness. Don't mistake me, you're quite sane. I mean 2 lines of blood, both of them old. One famous, the other one older. Harry said nothing. Both of you are brave. The hat continued its inventory. The one everyone knows is brave in the way Gryffindors are brave. Present tense, warm, physical. The other one is patient, cunning, knows how to wait for the right moment. Slytherin would suit that part of you very well. A pause, longer than the others. But you know that. You've read the notes. Harry kept his answer short. I need the lion's face, for now. You understand what you're asking me to do. You said it yourself. You work with what the wearer values, not what they conceal. A breath. I value patience. I value the long game. I value finishing what was started. He let that settle. None of those belong exclusively to Slytherin. No, the hat agreed. They don't. And then, in something close to amusement, the snake can wait. You'll need the lion's face a little longer. Gryffindor. The table cheered. Harry lifted the brim off his own head, set it back on the stool with both hands, a gesture more deliberate than anyone watching had reason to notice, and walked to his seat. By the 3rd week, Harry understood Hogwarts. Not the magic of it. That was coming slowly, denser than it should have been for someone who had never held a wand before September, like learning to move a weight that had been incorrectly estimated by every instrument designed to measure it. His Wingardium Leviosa was technically correct. The feather rose on the first attempt. Professor Flitwick beamed. What Flitwick did not appear to notice was that the feather had trembled before it moved. A hesitation, or not quite a hesitation, more like a negotiation between Harry's intent and whatever inside him was providing the force, like terms being settled before a contract could be signed. Harry did not mention this. He did not mention anything he wasn't directly asked about. He answered in class when addressed. He ate breakfast, went to lessons, played Exploding Snap with Ron in the evenings, and filed everything else away. Ron had noticed, not what Harry was, but what Harry did. The watching, the quiet calibration, the way Harry looked at Snape on the first day, not with the nervousness most students showed, but with the focused attention of someone reading a document. Ron had no language for it yet. He filed it under Harry's weird about stuff sometimes, offered him the last of his mother's fudge, and didn't press further. Harry liked this about Ron too. It was the library where the equilibrium broke. He was between the stacks in the charm section, not studying, just reading. Because the Black Vault had given him access to magical theory that Hogwarts' curriculum would not reach for 3 years, and he was filling in the gaps quietly when someone came around the corner and stopped in front of him without any introduction. The girl from the sorting, Granger. She had a book under each arm and a quill behind her ear, and she was looking at him with an expression that belonged not to an 11-year-old, but to someone who had been waiting 3 weeks to ask a question and had decided she'd waited long enough. Your Wingardium Leviosa was wrong, she said. Not wrong in the way Neville's was wrong. Wrong in a different way. The feather hesitated before it moved. Flitwick didn't notice, but I did. Magic doesn't hesitate. It responds. Unless the source of the magic is doing something the spell isn't built to account for. She tilted her head. Your magic feels like it comes from somewhere older than you. That doesn't happen with most first years. A pause, precise as punctuation. What are you, actually? Harry looked at her for a moment. He had told no one. Not Ron, not any teacher, not an owl because he had no one to write to. He had carried Regulus's letter in his inside robe pocket for 3 weeks, and read it 4 more times and said nothing. The first person to notice something was different had done it in 3 weeks with no access to the vault, no Black family texts, and nothing except her own eyes and a better-than-average understanding of magical theory. He reached into his robe pocket and took out the letter. You can read it, he said, but I want it back. Hermione Granger took the letter, sat cross-legged on the library floor between the shelves, and read it without speaking. Twice. Then she produced the quill from behind her ear, opened the back cover of the book under her arm to its blank end papers, and began writing. Not a summary. Questions. He could see them forming as her hand moved. Blood confundus, research mechanism, dormant vault, access precedent, sacrifice binding, what are the terms, RAB, Regulus Black, D, 1979. How? Nobody in Harry's life had ever responded to the truth about him with intellectual hunger. He sat down on the floor, put his back against the opposite shelf, and watched her work. After several minutes, she looked up. How much does Dumbledore know? He sent Hagrid to collect me. Hagrid went pale when the key dissolved. Dumbledore knows exactly what the key was built to do and why it dissolved. She wrote that down. And the Black family vault, is there more material? Documents, records, objects, cases of them. We need access before term ends. She said we without inflection, as though the pronoun were already established. I'll research the lineage law over Christmas. I need the letter for 2 more minutes. She was already reading it again. The sacrifice binding, when the time comes, the magic will know what to do. That's a specific phrasing. It implies terms already in place. A contract. She looked up. Does it feel like a contract? Your magic? Harry thought about the feather, the hesitation before it moved, the sense of terms being settled before the force was released. Yes, he said, that's exactly what it feels like. She handed the letter back. She had 4 pages of notes. Harry put the letter in his pocket and understood, with the quiet finality of a thing becoming true, that he had found his strategist. Snape arrived the way weather arrives, not announced, but suddenly present, the room adjusting around him before anyone had consciously registered he'd entered. He moved to the front without looking at the class, set nothing on the desk because he carried nothing, and stood with his hands behind his back, and surveyed the room in the particular silence of a man who had already decided what he thought of everyone in it and was taking his time letting them know. Potter, he said, without appearing to look at Harry specifically. He appeared to look at no one. Our new celebrity. The class went still. Tell me, Snape said, his voice quiet enough that the students at the back had to concentrate to hear it. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The question was not asked in good faith. The room understood this. It was designed to produce a specific response, which was silence, which would be interpreted as ignorance, which was the point. Harry said, the draught of living death. It's a powerful sleeping potion. Asphodel isn't added directly. It goes into the wormwood infusion only after the infusion has reduced by 1/3, or the volatile oils in the asphodel destabilize the base. Snape's expression did not change. Where, he said, very carefully, would you find a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. It counteracts most poisons. The quality of the bezoar affects the yield. Highland goat bezoars are more potent than lowland variants by approximately 40%, according to Gaspard Shingleton's 1782 compendium. A silence with texture to it. And what is the difference? Snape said, and now his voice had something in it that was not quite the register it had been before, something that suggested the interrogation had become a different animal than he'd planned for. Between monkshood and wolfsbane, they're the same plant, also called aconite. Toxic in all 3 forms, the distinction is regional naming convention rather than botanical. The Welsh tradition calls it wolfsbane because the root was used to tip hunting arrows. The academic tradition calls it monkshood after the petal formation. Harry paused for exactly 1 beat. Professor Snape, the draught of living death has a Black family refinement that omits the 5th clockwise stir in favor of a sustained counterclockwise reduction at the point of asphodel addition. The resulting compound binds more completely. The yield differential is documented in the restricted section, if you're interested. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. It was not a simple look. It moved through several things in sequence: surprise, then assessment, then something that had no clean name, before settling into stillness. He did not call on Harry again that lesson. Harry copied his notes and said nothing further, and did not look at Snape again either. There was no need. The position had been established. The terms of this particular exchange had been set, clearly and early, by someone Snape had expected to find unprepared. The account, it turned out, was not limited to Gringotts. Harry was walking back from the library when he heard it, low, continuous, moving through the stone like something alive and searching. Not human, not quite animal. A language that didn't use sound the way most languages did, but used pressure instead, the weight of meaning applied directly against the walls. He stopped. The corridor was empty. He stood very still, the way Regulus's notes had described standing still, not frozen but listening, the Black family discipline of treating silence as information rather than absence. The voice moved away from him, west, descending, and without thinking, before he had decided anything, he answered it. 3 syllables. He didn't know what they meant. They arrived in his mouth already formed, the way words arrive in dreams, with full intent behind them even if the waking mind cannot account for the grammar. He felt them leave him and go into the stone, and he stood in the corridor afterward with the particular feeling of having done something irreversible. Hermione was at the far end of the corridor. She had been close enough to hear. She was looking at him with her quill out. "Do it again," she said. "I don't know how." It wasn't deliberate. What did it feel like? Harry thought about it. Like recognizing a word in a language I didn't know I'd learned. She wrote that down. She didn't look frightened, which was the correct response. She looked like a person who had been handed a piece of evidence and was deciding where to file it. "The Chamber of Secrets opened 3 weeks ago," she said. "Something is moving through the school, something in the walls, and you just spoke to it." A pause. "In parcel tongue." "Yes. The question is why," she said, "and I don't think the answer is the one everyone's going to assume." She found the passage 6 days later, Ancestral Magic of the British Isles, published 1834, not on any standard reading list, a single copy in the restricted section under the call mark for bloodline theory. Hermione had applied for access through the same precedent she'd used twice before: academic research, ancient houses study, the Black family exemption Harry had arranged for her in first year. The relevant paragraph was on page 412, in a chapter titled Linguistic Inheritance and the Blood Memory. It has been observed in rare cases among gray magic families that prolonged association with a parcel mouth, specifically prolonged proximity to active parcel tongue use in service or ritual contexts, can produce in the blood of those present what is termed a linguistic residue, or blood echo. This residue does not confer the ability to speak parcel tongue independently. Rather, it embeds in the bloodline a passive recognition of the language, which in subsequent generations may manifest as active speech where the magical core is sufficiently powerful to animate the echo. She read it aloud in the library that evening, her finger tracking across the page, her voice careful and neutral. Then she set the book down. "This contradicts everything the standard literature says about parcel tongue," she said. "Modern scholarship treats it as exclusively hereditary from Slytherin's line, or transferred through direct soul contact. The blood echo mechanism isn't mentioned anywhere in print after 1834. A pause, which means either the 1834 scholars were wrong, or the later scholars simply stopped looking. Harry said Regulus spent over a year in Voldemort's inner circle, where parcel tongue would have been used regularly in ritual contexts. In direct communication, she closed the book. He couldn't speak it himself, but he absorbed the echo, and it passed to you. The Chamber of Secrets was Voldemort's architecture, the basilisk moving through the walls was Voldemort's creature, and Harry could speak to it, not because Voldemort had left a fragment of himself in Harry's scar, but because Regulus had stood in enough dark rooms that the language of those rooms had become part of his blood. He was not Voldemort's inheritance. He was the residue of someone who had walked very close to Voldemort and survived long enough to father a son. The distinction mattered. It mattered in a way Harry felt at the level of his chest, where Regulus's letter still lived, folded small in the inside pocket of his robe. Harry did not know what he was looking for. He only knew that his feet had brought him here, past the main staircase, left at the landing, through a door with no lock that felt like it should have one. A ward sense, Hermione had called it when he'd described it. The Black family's ancestral affinity for blood-keyed spaces, his magic-recognized architecture built by his family, even when the family had not intended it to be found. The room was small and used for storage, broken chairs, an old telescope, 3 trunks stacked against the east wall. On the west wall, hung between 2 empty frames, a portrait. The woman in it was about 30, dark-robed, silver-pinned at the collar, with the Black family's characteristic severity of bone, a face built for giving instructions, not for softening them. Her hair was dark and contained. She was painted in 3/4 view, looking at something outside the frame's edge with the attention of a woman accustomed to watching entrances. She had not noticed Harry yet. He said quietly, "I think this is yours." She turned. She went very still. "You have Regulus's eyes." Not loudly, not with grief, quite though grief was in it, compressed and controlled, the Black family's version of grief which looked from the outside like deliberate stillness. "I thought I'd never see those eyes again." "I'm his son," Harry said. "Harry." Walburga Black looked at him for a long moment. This was not the woman who screamed from the wall at Grimmauld Place. That portrait was from the end, painted after 2 sons had become strangers and the house had contracted to fit only the thing she'd let herself become. This woman was 30, still in full command of herself. The purity obsession had not yet calcified. The grief had not yet curdled. What remained was the original, a matriarch of an ancient house, trained from childhood in a kind of power that most of the wizarding world had forgotten was power at all. "Sit down," she said. Harry sat on one of the broken chairs. "I'll teach you one thing today," Walburga said. "The rest will follow if you're paying attention." She settled back in the painted chair, hands folded. "Tell me how you would get information from a person who does not intend to give it to you. Ask someone else who has it. And if no one else has it?" Harry thought about the whispering mirror, about the summer, about the hours he had spent in the black vault with his finger on the glass, learning the shape of other people's debts. "Find what they owe you," he said, "and ask for payment in kind." Something moved in her expression, not approval, which would have been too warm, but the acknowledgement of correct work. One precise nod. "The mirror shows you their position," she said, "but it doesn't tell you when to speak." "Do you know when to speak?" "No." "Good. That's an honest answer. Most people in your position would have lied." She unfolded her hands. "You speak when they have committed to a version of themselves in the room, when they have decided what they are, in this conversation, to you. You wait until they have shown you the shape of it, and then you name the price." Her gray eyes, exact as instruments, held his. "You do not threaten. You do not raise your voice. You simply tell them what they owe, and you allow the weight of that to do the work. The debt does the threatening. You don't have to." Harry was quiet for a moment. "I did something like that," he said, "in the summer, before I knew what to call it." The shop was crowded. Lockhart's new books had drawn a queue extending to the door, the noise substantial. Harry had been in the corner with the family texts, not the Lockhart display, when he saw Lucius Malfoy move through the crowd. The way he moved told you everything. Slow, unbothered, the particular pace of a man who had never needed to negotiate a room because the room had always arranged itself around him. He wore the contempt of someone born into it, not targeted, not deliberate, just reflexive, the way breathing is reflexive. He took Ginny Weasley's old textbook from her cauldron and set it back with a comment about Weasley finances that he clearly didn't consider worth actual cruelty. It was too casual for cruelty. It was the comment of a man passing a puddle. He was walking past Harry when Harry said, quietly enough that only Malfoy could hear, "House Malfoy accepted Black family hospitality in October 1975. A claiming supper. You never discharged the debt, Lord Malfoy. 17 years of compound interest by Black ancestral reckoning." Lucius Malfoy stopped. He turned, he looked at the boy in front of him, the hand-me-down robes, the round glasses, the scar, with an attention that had nothing casual in it. He looked for a long time. Then he went pale. Not gradually, one motion, like a door closing. He left the shop without another word. "You already knew," Hermione said. They were back in the library, the broken chair room, a corridor, and a staircase away, Walburga's portrait folded into the afternoon behind them, before the formal framework. "You already knew how to do it." "I knew what the mirror showed me. I didn't have language for it yet." Her quill moved. She wrote dead inscription, self-taught application before theoretical grounding. Then she looked up. "How much does he owe us?" "Us." The word had been appearing in her sentences for a year now, quiet and without announcement, taking up its position as though it had always been there. Harry had noticed it the first time. He had not corrected it. He did not correct it now. He nodded once. "More than Draco's school supplies," he said. Hermione wrote that down too. The Dementor moved through the compartment the way cold moves through a gap in a wall, not with speed but with inevitability, the temperature dropping in its wake, the light going flat. Ron went rigid. Hermione made a small, involuntary sound. Harry felt the chill arrive, and then felt something beneath it, something that should have been fear. It was not fear. It was rage. Clean, structural, impersonal. The way a foundation wall responds to pressure by pushing back rather than yielding. The Dementor was consuming something it had identified as available, the warmth of experience, the currency that gray magic ran on. Harry's magic recognized the theft and objected to it with the force of something very old. And underneath the rage, a voice. Not Lily's voice, not James's, Regulus, calm and specific, reciting the terms of the sacrifice binding in the same compressed handwriting Harry had memorized from the vault notes. The exchange was made freely, the debt is valid, the terms are recorded, the magic will hold. Not warm, not what Dementors were designed to take, stone holding weight, The Dementor withdrew. Lupin, from the opposite seat, was watching Harry with an expression that had moved past bafflement and arrived somewhere that looked like recognition arriving too late. He had chocolate ready. He held it out, but his eyes were doing something other than what his hands were performing. "What did you hear?" Lupin asked. "Not what you expected," Harry said. He took the chocolate, not screaming. Lupin said nothing. He filed it in the same place he filed things that required more thought than the present moment allowed. 3 sessions, nothing. The first time Harry tried the memory Lupin suggested, happiness, warmth, safety, he had few enough of those, and the ones he had felt borrowed, provisional, belonging to someone else's story about who he was. A Quidditch match, Christmas at Hogwarts, Ron's laugh. The memories were real, but when he reached for the Patronus, his magic would not hold them. They slipped. The spell produced a wisp of silver that dissolved before it shaped itself into anything. The second session, he tried James. Not the idea of James, but the specific grief of him. A man who had died protecting a child he'd raised as his own, who had sealed a secret for a brother not his blood and never spoken of it. Harry could hold that grief. It was clean. But the Patronus would not be a stag. When he pushed the memory toward the spell, his magic recoiled from the shape gently but definitively, the way a lock recoils from a key that is the right size but the wrong cut. James Potter was not the blood the spell was looking for. The third session, Lupin said quietly, "Tell me about the moment you felt most like yourself." Harry was quiet long enough that Lupin had begun to speak again. "The Black family vault," Harry said. "The first time I walked in." Lupin went very still. "Use that," he said. The Patronus erupted, not silver-white but gray, the gray of old stone, of winter water, of early morning before color arrives. A hound, lean, geometric, running in absolute silence across Lupin's office floor, with a speed that seemed wrong for something made of light, too purposeful, too direct. It reached the far wall and turned and held its position. Lupin's wand dropped 2 inches before he caught it. "That's not a stag," he said. His voice was carefully level, in the way a person's voice is when they are managing a reaction they haven't decided yet to share. "No," Harry said, "it isn't." They looked at each other across the gray hound. Lupin said very quietly, almost to himself, "Regulus." He did not explain how he had arrived at the name, and Harry did not ask. Some connections, Harry understood, were made privately and kept that way. Harry said, "You knew him." "I was a marauder," Lupin said. "We all knew Regulus, Sirius didn't talk about him." "After." He set his wand carefully on the desk. "There are things I'd like to ask you, when you're ready." "After," Harry said. "After the year is over." It happened the way it was always going to happen. At the end, in the dark, with Peter Pettigrew's face confirming what Regulus's letter had told Harry years before he'd ever seen that face. The shack was loud and cramped, and everyone was speaking at once, which was fine because Harry needed a moment to look at Sirius Black properly. Sirius had been described to him in stages: Creature's bond mechanics, Lupin's careful silences, Walburga's portrait, which spoke of her younger son with the specific grief of a mother who had loved the wrong things more than she had loved him and had known it too late. Harry had built a picture of Sirius from these accounts the way a scholar builds a figure from records, reliable in outline, uncertain in detail. The man in front of him was thinner than any account had suggested. Azkaban had removed something from the joints of him, but the eyes were exact, the same gray exactness as Walburga's portrait, and they were looking at Harry with the hunger of someone who has been wanting to say something for 12 years and is finally in the same room as the person it was meant for. Ron and Hermione and Lupin were all speaking. Harry waited. Then he said quietly enough that only Sirius could hear, "You were supposed to protect him. My father trusted you, and you failed." The room did not go quiet. It was already going quiet, but Sirius went very still in the way that someone goes still when a sentence lands somewhere they were not prepared for, because the sentence was not about James Potter. They both knew that. "You know," Sirius said. His voice was careful, the way a man is careful when he is standing somewhere fragile. "Since first year," a long pause. "How much?" "Everything." Harry kept his voice flat. "The Black family register. Not coldness, but precision. I know who my father was. I know what he did in the cave. I know he trusted you, and he was right to trust you, and then he went somewhere you couldn't follow, and you've been carrying that for 12 years. He held Sirius's gaze. "I'm not here to punish you for it. I'm here to tell you that I know, and that what happens next depends on what you do with what I'm giving you right now." Sirius looked at him for a long time. He suspected. Sirius said finally. The words came out the way confessions do. Not with relief, but with the texture of something that has been inside too long. I suspected. Neither of us said it out loud. Lily and James had sealed it, and we respected that. And then Regulus went into that cave and I couldn't. He stopped. Started again from a different place. I failed him. I've known that for 12 years. Yes, Harry said, you did. No softening, no absolution offered. Sirius looked at him and Harry let him look. I'm not James's son, Harry said. I never was, but you are the head of the house I've inherited, and we need to talk about what that means. He turned back to the room, to Pettigrew, to what still needed doing after this is over. Sirius had been free for 3 weeks. Free in the sense of no longer imprisoned. Not free in the sense of cleared, which was a problem catalogued already in the third of Hermione's notebooks dedicated to Black family legal strategy. Harry arrived at Grimmauld Place on a Tuesday afternoon. He had the codex under his arm, the relevant pages marked with black ribbon. He had the letter in his inside pocket. He had the signet ring on his right hand, which had appeared there on his 12th birthday, without ceremony, sized perfectly, as if it had simply decided the time had come. Kreacher opened the door before Harry knocked. The house elf stood in the entrance hall and looked at Harry, and then very slowly, the way very old things move when they are finally moved, he fell to his knees, his hands pressed flat to the floor. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Master Regulus's blood, Kreacher said. The words were barely sound. Master Regulus's blood comes home, Harry said gently. Get up, Kreacher, we have work to do. In the weeks that followed the claim right, Kreacher briefed Harry on everything he knew. Every secret the house held, every piece of intelligence Regulus had shared with him before the cave. Most of it was political architecture, family debts, the web of obligations between houses, the ministry connections the Blacks had cultivated for generations. Some of it was magical. One piece was neither. Regulus had noted in the margins of his cave account that Voldemort maintained in Fairy not only in the Sea Cave, but at a second ritual site, the graveyard where his father was buried, a place of personal significance to Voldemort, a place he returned to in his mind, as certain powerful people returned to the locations of their first great victories. The inferi placed there were older than the caves, connected through the same sacrificial binding, and had been waiting, Regulus wrote, for the blood that created the exchange to return and give them new purpose. Harry read that section 3 times. He filed it in the place where he filed things he did not yet know how to use. The drawing room, the tapestry. Sirius in the doorway. Harry read the claim right from the codex. 3 paragraphs in the old register of grey magic, which was not a spell so much as a formal statement made to the magic of the house itself. He read it without inflection, without ceremony, the way Regulus's notes had specified. The claim right requires precision, not performance. When he finished, the tapestry moved, not dramatically, 3 threads slowly connecting 3 names that had been separate. Harry Regulus Black, appearing for the first time on the fabric, in dark ink, at the end of Regulus's line. The house absorbed the claim the way the Gringotts' floors absorbed sound, completely without echo, as though it had been waiting to. Sirius watched from the doorway. He could have objected. As head of house, the right was his. He didn't move, didn't speak, not until the last thread settled. Then he slid down the door frame until he was sitting on the floor, not in supplication, but in the specific exhaustion of a man who has been holding something up for 12 years and has just been told he is allowed to set it down. It should have been Regulus who came home, Sirius said. I know that. He looked up at Harry. You're the best of both of them. Take it. Walburga's portrait, transported from the Hogwarts storage room the previous week, now restored to the drawing room wall where it had always belonged, spoke. The House of Black recognizes Harry Regulus Black, Lord of the Seat, son of Regulus Arcturus Black, heir of Isidora Rosier. Her voice was formal, exact, the ancestral witness delivering the ancestral record. The name is recorded. The blood speaks. From the doorway, barely audible, Welcome home, Master Harry. Kreacher's voice was almost no voice at all. Welcome home, sir. Harry stood under the tapestry with his name in the threads and said nothing. Some accounts did not require words when they were settled. They simply were. He and Hermione had discussed the possibility in September, the week after the goblet arrived in the entrance hall. She had sat across from him with the tournament rule book open and a second notebook for the Black family legal cross-reference, and said without preamble, Someone could use this to bind you. If your name came out, The contract would be magically enforced regardless of how it got in. Whoever did it would have an 11-month window to do whatever they needed a Triwizard Champion present for. Who would want that? Harry said. Anyone who needs you somewhere specific and vulnerable, with a legal framework preventing you from refusing. She wrote something in the notebook. Voldemort, Dumbledore, anyone with access to your name and knowledge of how the goblet's binding mechanism works. Is there a Black family precedent for challenging a fraudulent contract? I'm researching it, but it would take longer than the enforcement window allows. She looked up. I think we should assume the name is going in. I think we should be ready for that. Harry nodded. They prepared. So when the goblet spat out the fourth parchment on the night of the Halloween feast, and McGonagall read the name with the tone of a woman who had found something she was not supposed to find, Harry was the only person in the Great Hall who was not surprised. He walked to the front at the same pace he always walked. He took the scroll. He read it. He looked at Dumbledore across the high table, across the silence of 1,000 students who had stopped breathing. The House of Black will participate, he said. Not I didn't enter myself. Not this is a mistake. Nothing that gave anyone the satisfaction of his confusion or his fear. Dumbledore's eyes moved through several things in sequence before settling into the careful calm Harry had come to recognize as the headmaster's management face. Harry, I'll be in the champion's antechamber, Harry said. I assume there's a meeting. The room was small and self-important, decorated in the way of rooms that hosted decisions, heavy drapes, a long table, chairs arranged to face the door. Fleur Delacour stood at one end with the composure of someone trained from birth to be looked at, and had decided tonight she would do the looking instead. Cedric Diggory was by the window, quieter than his reputation suggested. Victor Crumb sat with his arms crossed and said nothing to anyone. Ludo Bagman arrived first among the officials. Then Bartemius Crouch. Then Karkaroff, with the carved deliberateness of a man who had predecided what he was going to say, and was arriving at the right moment to say it. Dumbledore came last with Madame Maxime. Karkaroff waited approximately 40 seconds before beginning. The objection was technical but loud. One school, two champions, a violation of the tournament's foundational rules, the integrity of the competition, the good name of Durmstrang, the rights of participating institutions. He used Fudge's name 3 times in 4 sentences, which told Harry precisely what leverage Karkaroff believed he had available. Harry waited. He waited until Karkaroff had finished, had made eye contact with Fudge to confirm the political backing was understood, had settled into the posture of a man expecting the room to begin moving in his direction. Then Harry reached into his inner robe pocket and set a folded document on the table. Lord Karkaroff, he said, my family extends its regards. He did not unfold the document. He left it in the center of the table where everyone could see it. The Black family crest was visible on the outer fold. He set it with the same motion someone uses to set a key beside a locked door. No threat implied, only the fact of what it opened. During your years of service to the Dark Lord, Durmstrang's institutional accounts intersected several times with a Black family cover operation, a network my father established to move intelligence to parties working against Voldemort. The interaction occurred in 1978. The debt was incurred by Durmstrang's then administration, transferred to you as headmaster upon your appointment, and has never been disclosed or discharged. Harry's voice was level throughout. The sum, by Black ancestral reckoning, is considerable. Shall we discuss the terms of discharge, or shall we proceed with the tournament? The room was very quiet. Karkaroff looked at the document. He looked at Harry. He was doing the calculation that men like Karkaroff always did. What does this person actually know versus what are they implying? And arriving, correctly, at the understanding that the document contained exactly what Harry said it contained. Because the House of Black did not bluff with paper, he went white. A single motion like something withdrawing. He did not object further. Bagman, who had been watching the exchange with the uncomfortable attention of a man realizing the room was operating at a level he hadn't prepared for, cleared his throat. Right, then. If everyone's... Yes. Shall we proceed? Ron knew Harry hadn't entered his own name. That was not the problem. The problem was something Ron couldn't put language around. Something he'd been circling for 3 years and had always managed to file under Harry's weird about stuff sometimes and leave alone. But the night Harry's name came out of the goblet, he had watched Harry walk to the front of the hall, take the scroll, read it, and look at Dumbledore with an expression that contained no fear, no surprise, no disbelief. Only the focused attention of someone who had already decided what to do. And Ron had felt for the first time the specific vertigo of realizing that the person you thought you knew had been a surface, not a depth. He sat across from Harry in the common room that evening and said nothing about it. Harry was reading the codex which he kept covered, but Ron had seen the Black family crest on the spine enough times to know the shape of it. Hermione was at the table with 3 notebooks open. The fire did what fires do. Ron watched them work and understood, with a clarity that arrived too quietly to argue with, that he was not part of whatever this was. He was adjacent to it, he was welcome in the room, and he was not part of the room, and he had not known those were different things until now. He went to bed without saying so. The seed, when it came, arrived through lavender brown. 3 days later, in passing, the way things planted deliberately are always mentioned in passing, Draco was saying, I know, but he was saying it quite seriously that Potter's been playing a long game from the beginning, that he's not really a Gryffindor, that you lot are just cover. She made a face indicating she didn't necessarily believe it. Mad, right? Ron said yeah, mad. He went to Quidditch practice and played 3 hours of aggressive keeper drills and did not think about it again that day. But it had been said. And the nature of things said in the dark, in passing, by someone who knows exactly what they are planting, is that they do not need to be believed to take root. The champions' pre-task meeting was held in a tent near the Quidditch pitch. Bagman ran it with the professional enthusiasm of a man who needed everyone in the room to believe he was in charge. He told them nothing concrete, confirmed nothing about the task, smiled with the substance of a man who had once been very good at one specific thing and had built an entire identity on the memory of it. When the meeting concluded, he came to Harry specifically. He put a hand on Harry's shoulder. He said, "Don't worry, son. Just do your best. The crowd's going to love you regardless." Harry looked at the hand on his shoulder. He looked at it the way he looked at things that required removal, not with anger, but with the precise attention of someone identifying a problem and deciding the most efficient solution. Then he looked at Bagman. "Mr. Bagman," he said. The champions nearby went very still without appearing to, the specific stillness of people who have registered that a conversation has changed register. The House of Black has records of your goblin debt from 1994, the amount, the intermediary, and the terms of the arrangement. A pause, the length of a single breath. I would advise you not to call me son, and I would advise you not to touch me. The hand was removed immediately. Bagman laughed. A sound entirely without humor in it, the laugh of a man buying time while his legs decided what to do. He said something about seeing them all in the morning, and left through the tent flap with the clumsiness of a man trying to appear as though he had chosen to leave. Fleur Delacour had not moved throughout the exchange. She stood 3 feet away and looked at Harry now with the expression of someone recalibrating a judgment made on insufficient information. Not warmth, not admiration exactly. Recognition. The specific recognition of someone trained from childhood in precisely this kind of room, who had just understood they were not the only one in it. She said nothing. She nodded back. Outside the tent, the November sky had gone the particular gray of old stone, indifferent to tournaments and debts, and the quiet work of accounts being maintained. In the dormitory above, the black codex lay open on Harry's desk to a bookmarked page. The page was titled, "On the Patience Required Before Calling a Debt." He was getting better at the patience. The rest, as always, would follow. The maze was alive, not in the way plants are alive, but in the way old magic is alive. Responsive, attentive, sorting information through whatever mechanism sustained it. Harry had felt it the moment he stepped between the hedges, a ward sense not unlike the one that had guided him to Walburga's portrait 2 years ago, a pressure in the air that indicated he was being read. He read back. Grey magic families traded in proximity to old magic. Regulus's notes included a section on sentient magical constructs, labyrinths, living forests, castle ward systems, and how to approach them not as obstacles but as negotiations. They respond to intent before action, Regulus had written. State your purpose to the structure before you state it to anyone in the structure. The construct will choose what it shows you accordingly. Harry walked into the maze and told it, clearly and without ceremony, what he was, the Lord of the Black Seat, moving through an enchantment that ran on Hogwarts magic, which had been financed for centuries in part by Black family endowments. He stated no threat. He stated only his purpose, to reach the center. The maze did not clear a path. It wasn't capable of that. But it stopped actively obstructing him, which was sufficient. He reached the cup before Cedric Diggory by 11 minutes. He put his hand on it without hesitation. The world lurched. Then, bone-white gravestones, a moonless sky, dark ground underfoot that was not Hogwarts grass, and Cedric, who had come through after him on the ground before Harry could do anything about it. Not stunned, not hexed. The green light had been instantaneous. Harry did not have time to process Cedric as a loss. He had time to process Cedric as a fact. The fact was, Cedric was on the ground, and someone had just killed him. And the someone was the small hooded figure moving across the graveyard with a bundle in its arms, and there was a stone trough at the center of the graveyard, and, at its far edge behind the headstones, a wide stone basin sunk into the earth. Dark, still, wrong, and Harry was already raising his wand when something serpentine and silent wound around his arms and pulled him backward into the grip of a stone angel, and his wand was gone. The grave he was pressed against read, Tom Riddle. He had time for one thought before Wormtail began the ritual. Hermione was right. They always had a location in mind. The ritual was old, older than the Ministry. Harry recognized it from the Codex's chapter on blood price magic. The bone, the flesh, the blood, each extracted with the particular violence of magic that had no interest in the consent of the body it was taking from. Wormtail was efficient and agonized in equal measure. Then there was a cauldron. Then something rising from it. Voldemort. He was exactly as the Codex's historical section described him. A man rebuilt rather than born, the proportions slightly wrong, the eyes red where the human eye placed color differently. He stood in the graveyard and breathed the night air, and it was clear that the act of breathing was, to him, more significant than it was to most people who breathed. He looked at Harry. "Harry Potter," he said. His voice was thin and precise, the voice of a man who had reconstructed everything including the instrument he used to speak. "I had hoped for more fear." Harry said nothing. His arm was bleeding where Wormtail had cut him. The blood had run down his forearm and dripped from his fingers, and the drops had fallen onto the grave soil and into the dark grass and toward the stone basin at the graveyard's edge. The basin. Harry looked at it properly for the first time. Wide, cut from dark stone, sunk into the earth behind the headstones in the way of things constructed rather than found. The surface of the water inside it was flat and very still, and below the stillness was the quality Harry had come to associate, through Creature's account, through Regulus's margin notes, with water that had something in it, something waiting. Creature had mentioned this. Regulus had written about it in the margin of his cave account. The note Harry had read 3 times and filed away because he hadn't yet known when he would need it. A second sight. The graveyard of the father, older than the cave, connected to the same binding, waiting for the blood that set the terms to return. Harry's blood was on the ground. The blood of Regulus Black's son. And the recognition arrived not as surprise, but as the settling of something that had always been true. The stone basin at the edge of the Riddle graveyard was Voldemort's second inferi vessel. The cave had been the first. This was the other. Older, connected to the same dark architecture built at the site Voldemort considered the origin of his power. The inferi here had been created through the same sacrifice binding Regulus had invoked in the cave, and they had been waiting, as Regulus had written, for the blood that created the exchange to come and give them new terms. He had 3 words from the Codex, the invocation of the sacrifice binding's inheritor clause. He had memorized them without knowing when. That was the patience Walburga had described. That was what the patience was for. He breathed once. Then he spoke 3 words into the dark water. Not parcel tongue, not a Latin incantation. 3 words in the old register of grey magic, the register that addressed the terms of an exchange rather than commanding a subject. Words that said, "Not obey me, but the debt has a new creditor, and the creditor is present, and the terms are invoked." The basin went more still. Then it stopped being still. The first inferius rose from the water without sound, the way things rise from dark water when the water is not the point. Then another. Then 6 more. Pale, waterlogged, moving with the particular directionlessness of creatures that have been waiting for direction. They paused, they turned, not toward Harry. Voldemort, mid-sentence, stopped speaking. The inferi moved toward him in absolute silence. The same purposeful geometry, the direction not going to change. Voldemort's wand was up immediately, the reflexes of the most dangerous wizard alive responding before the calculation could catch up, fire and light cast into the dark water, the inferi recoiling from heat. But there were more of them than there was fire. More importantly, there were Death Eaters in the circle who had not expected this, whose attention had fractured in the specific way attention fractures when the situation they had prepared for becomes a different situation entirely. Wormtail dropped Harry's wand in the chaos because Wormtail was the kind of man who dropped things. Harry's wand was in his hand in 3 seconds. He severed the ropes at his arms with a single wandless word. a gray magic cutting variant, learned from the Codex's 3rd chapter, practiced on Saturday mornings in the Grimmauld Library when Sirius was still asleep. He crossed the graveyard at a run, not toward the Death Eaters, but through the gap the Inferi had created, towards Cedric. Who was still on the ground? Who would remain on the ground? Who was the price of tonight in a way Harry could not carry until later, because later was not yet available? He grabbed Cedric's wrist. He reached the cup. The world lurched again. He arrived on his knees. The crowd saw him before they understood what they were seeing. Then the noise built, not the sound the 3rd task had been producing all evening. A different sound, the sound of recognition assembling itself in 3,000 people at once. Cedric was on the ground beside him. Harry was covered in blood, some of it his own, some of it Wormtail's. He was still holding Cedric's wrist. He did not remember deciding to keep holding it. Dumbledore reached him first, then Amos Diggory, then Chaos. Harry let go of Cedric's wrist. He stood. He looked at Dumbledore. "He's back," Harry said. "Voldemort is back. He has a body and a circle and a graveyard in Little Hangleton, and the dark mark is above it." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I'm all right. Cedric isn't. Deal with Cedric first." The Phoenix was on its perch. The silver instruments turned, as they always did, performing the appearance of answers without offering them. Dumbledore sat behind his desk with his hands folded and his face arranged into the expression Harry recognized as the beginning of a management conversation. Harry sat across from him, still in his tournament robes, still carrying the blood of the evening. He had not been given the opportunity to change, which was fine. The blood was useful. It was a reminder of what the night had actually been. Dumbledore began. He said Voldemort's return changed everything. He said Harry had shown extraordinary courage. He said there were things he needed to explain, things he had been waiting to share at the right moment, things about Harry's role in what was coming. His voice was warm and careful, and infinitely considerate of Harry's apparent youth and apparent need for guidance. Harry waited until the sentence ended. Then he reached into his robe pocket and set Cedric Diggory's wand on Dumbledore's desk. He set it with both hands. He left it there. "I used my father's magic tonight," he said. "My real father's magic, in the place where my real father's intelligence led me." His voice was flat, the Black family register. Precision, not performance. "I need you to understand something. I will never be managed by you again." He held Dumbledore's gaze across the wand that belonged to a boy who was dead because someone had found Harry useful. "Whatever you thought I was, whatever role you assigned me before I was old enough to refuse it, that is done." The pause Walburga had taught him, the pause that allowed the wait to arrive before the final words. "The House of Black does not serve the greater good. We serve our dead." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The instruments turned. The Phoenix did not move. "I see," Dumbledore said, very quietly. "Good," Harry said. He stood and left Cedric's wand on the desk. It was not his to take back. Outside, the grounds were loud with the specific noise of a night that had become something other than what it was supposed to be. In the graveyard in Little Hangleton, whatever remained of the Inferi had returned to their stone basin. Regulus's debt had been invoked once, partially, incompletely. The terms had been stated. The creditor had been acknowledged, the rest of the account remained open. Harry arrived 3 days after the 3rd task. Not the Dursleys, not the blood-warded Privet Drive, which Dumbledore had maintained for 14 years as though the fact of Harry's continued existence there was a policy rather than a choice. The specific protection of Lily's sacrifice had operated on a principle Hermione had spent the previous year researching. As long as Harry lived under the roof of someone who shared his mother's blood, Voldemort could not touch him. Archie Penhaligon had confirmed in a legal document what Hermione had already argued theoretically. When Wormtail used Harry's blood in the Riddle Graveyard ritual, the separation between Harry's blood and Voldemort's body that the ward was built to maintain had been dissolved. Voldemort now carried Harry's blood. The ward's primary purpose, keeping them apart, had already been compromised at its root. Whatever remained of it was a shell. The Black family wards Harry had been activating through study of the Codex operated on different principles entirely, and were not compromised. Dumbledore received a copy of Penhaligon's assessment by Owl on the morning Harry left for London. He did not reply. Creature opened the door before Harry knocked. As he always did, he took Harry's trunk without speaking. He led Harry to the study, not the drawing room, the study the room Regulus had used, which was smaller and faced the garden, and had a desk that still held the imprint of someone who had worked at it in concentrated rapid sessions, ink stains at the right-hand edge. Harry sat at the desk. He put the codex in the center drawer. He looked at the garden, which needed work, and decided the garden could wait. He had other work. The house did not let them in. This was not dramatic. No wards fired, no alarm sounded. No voice from a portrait instructed them to leave. The door simply did not respond to the order's method of entry, which was a specific knock pattern Dumbledore had established with the house's previous arrangement. The arrangement had changed. The house knew. Harry heard them on the step from the study. He gave them 4 minutes. Then he went to the entrance hall, opened the door himself, and looked at the assembled Order of the Phoenix. Moody, Tonks, Lupin, Shacklebolt, the Weasleys. Mad Eye's magical eyes swiveling over him with the suspicion it applied to everything. "You can come in," Harry said, "under guest conditions. The terms will be established in the dining room." "Guest conditions," Moody said. His voice was approximately the texture of gravel under a boot. "You're 15. 15 and Lord of the Black Seat," Harry said. "Come in or don't. The terms are the same either way." They came in. The dining room table was long enough for all of them. Harry sat at the head. Creature stood behind him to the left, which was the ancestral witness position, which Creature understood without being told. Sirius sat at the far end of the table with his arms crossed, and did not speak throughout, wearing the expression of a man watching something he has no right to interfere with. Harry presented the guest conditions. 3 of them. The Order could use Grimmauld Place as operational headquarters. No member of the Order could access the family library without direct authorization from Harry, given in writing and renewed weekly. No structural modifications to the house would be made without Harry's consent, including the removal of any object from any room. The conditions were not negotiable. They were the terms under which the Black Seat was extending hospitality to a third-party organization. Either the terms were accepted, or they were not. Molly Weasley said, "Harry, you're a child. You've been through something terrible, and we want to help you, but this isn't." "Mrs. Weasley," Harry said. He kept his voice exactly level. "I understand you're concerned. I'm asking you to accept the terms or decline them. Those are the available options." Molly looked at Dumbledore, who was sitting to Harry's right, with the calmness of a man who had already decided what he thought of the situation and had filed it under useful for now. His eyes, above the half-moon spectacles, were doing the thing they did when Dumbledore was accommodating something he intended to address later through a longer route. "The terms are reasonable," Dumbledore said. "We accept." He said it before anyone else could speak, which told Harry exactly what Harry had expected. Dumbledore had a plan. Agreeing to the terms was not concession, it was positioning. Harry noted it and moved on. The Order began its work. Grimmauld Place became, as Dumbledore intended, a headquarters. Harry allowed it. The house ran on 2 tracks simultaneously, the Order's operational track, which Harry had access to selectively, and the Black family track, which no one accessed without Harry's word. Hermione arrived at Grimmauld Place in the morning with a folder under her arm and the expression of someone who had been waiting 3 weeks to deliver something. She set the folder on the desk in Regulus's study and opened it to the first page. "The third side," she said. "Formal declaration. Invoking the noble house of Black's sovereign neutrality provision under the Ancestral Houses Compact of 1689. She turned the page. That compact has never been repealed because no one has needed to invoke it since 1712. Archie Penhaligon confirmed the legal mechanism is still active. He's one of 3 people currently alive who know it exists. Harry read the first page, then the second, then the third. The language was precise, formal, built in the register of documents that intend to survive challenges. The declaration did not position the House of Black against Dumbledore. It did not position the House of Black with Voldemort. It positioned the House of Black as a separate sovereign entity within Wizarding Britain, with the ancient right to pursue its own objectives in a time of civil conflict without conscription by either party. "It means," Hermione said, "that neither Dumbledore nor Voldemort can compel you legally. Not through the Ministry, not through Wizengamot authority, not through any instrument the current legal framework provides. What can they do? Ask, persuade, offer terms." She paused. "The same things they would need to do with any sovereign entity." Harry looked at the last page, the signature line, his name and his title, which was longer than his name, printed in Hermione's careful hand. Harry Regulus Black, Lord of the Ancient and Most Noble House of Black, Lord of the Black Seat. He signed it. Hermione countersigned as Arch Scholar, which was the title she had taken on without announcement 2 months ago, which Harry had accepted without ceremony because it was simply what she was. She filed the original with the Wizengamot's through Penhaligon's office before dinner. Molly Weasley had been cleaning. This was, in the context of Grimmauld Place, always the beginning of something. She had moved through the ground floor systematically over 3 weeks, removing what she called dark objects with the thoroughness of a woman who understood the house as a problem to be solved. Harry had allowed it. The ground floor objects were not the ones that mattered. He had moved everything of significance into the library in June. On a Thursday morning in late August, Molly Weasley walked to the library corridor with a box and a determined expression. The ward activated the moment her hand touched the door. Not violently. The door did not move at all, which was in the context of wards the loudest possible response. Creature appeared in the corridor. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He stood with his hands folded and his ancient eyes very steady, and he said, "The Lord has not given permission for entry to the family library. Mrs. Weasley will please step back." "This is a house full of dangerous objects," Molly said. Her voice was controlled in the way of a woman keeping something considerably larger under firm management. "I am trying to make it safe." "The Lord has been informed of Mrs. Weasley's concern," Creature said. "The Lord has noted it. The library remains closed." A pause, exactly the length of a door being held open and then closed. "Mrs. Weasley will please step back." Molly did not step back. She was a woman who had raised 7 children and buried people she loved, and the word please from a house elf was not, in her experience, a boundary. The corridor door sealed, not with a bang, not with light. The door simply became a wall. One moment there was a door, the next there was an uninterrupted corridor. The box was still in Molly's hands. Creature's voice came from the other side of what had been the entrance. "The Lord has asked me to advise the Order of the Phoenix that their guest status at number 12 is suspended, effective immediately." A pause. "A carriage has been arranged." The Order left. Not all of them were angry. Lupin looked resigned in the way of a man who had seen this coming. Tonks was watching Harry with an expression balanced between professional assessment and something warmer that she was professionally suppressing. Moody said nothing, which was more respectful than anything he'd said in 6 weeks. Molly did not look at Harry as she passed. She would again eventually. She was not a woman whose love could be cancelled by a disagreement, and Harry knew this, and it mattered to him more than he allowed his expression to show. The last one out was Snape. He had been in the house for 6 weeks attending order meetings that Harry was not invited to, which Harry had permitted because the information cost of allowing Snape to continue his access was lower than the political cost of excluding Dumbledore's spy. Snape had attended every meeting, said little, and watched Harry with the steady attention of a man building a file. He stopped on the step beside Harry. "You realize what you've done," he said. "Quiet. Not a question. You've separated yourself from Dumbledore's protection." Harry looked at him. Snape was not like the other Order members. He was not here because he believed in the cause. Not exactly, not in the way Lupin believed, or Sirius believed, or Molly believed. He was here for reasons that were more specific and more personal, and Harry knew what they were because Regulus's letter had named him. "Professor Snape," Harry said, "my father spent a year inside the Death Eaters discovering Voldemort's greatest secret. He died before he could tell anyone who could act on it. He trusted the wrong people with information." Harry kept his eyes on Snape's. "I won't make the same mistake." A pause, the length of a door opening, "and neither will you, because now you know that I know you were on his side before Dumbledore ever recruited you. Regulus's letter names you. He let that settle into the space between them. So we understand each other." Snape's face moved through something complicated. Not surprise, exactly. Not fear. Something that had more layers than either of those. The expression of a man who had been carrying a specific weight for 17 years and has just discovered that someone else can see its shape. He left without another word. For the rest of year 5, he treated Harry with a cold, professional neutrality that was closer to respect than anything he had ever previously shown. He did not call him Potter as a diminishment. He called him nothing at all, which in Snape's register was its own kind of acknowledgement. Inside the house, the library ward was still sealed, the corridor door was still a wall, the black codex was still in the center drawer of Regulus's desk, the third side had its seat, the terms were set, the guests had been thanked for their visit. The house, for the first time in 30 years, was being run by someone who understood what it was. Ron lay in the dark and watched Harry work. This was not new. Harry had been working at his desk after hours, since 3rd year, the codex open, the lamp low, the Black family signet ring catching light at his right hand. What was new was the quality of Ron's watching. In third year, he had watched the way you watch a friend doing something you don't fully understand, with the comfortable certainty that the friend was still legible to you where it mattered. In fifth year, he watched the way you watch something you are trying to see all of, because you have begun to suspect you are only seeing part of it. Harry was writing in the cipher Walburga had taught him, a notation system that looked like it belonged to a discipline that had nothing to do with letters. Ron had asked about it once, early on, and Harry had explained, and Ron had filed the explanation in the place he filed things he understood well enough not to need again. Now he found himself wishing he had paid more attention. It was not that Harry was unkind. That was the thing that made it hard to articulate, even to himself, lying in the dark. Harry was exactly what he had always been. Same jokes, same reflexes, same ability to reduce Quidditch to a tactical problem without removing any of the enjoyment. But the emotional ground Ron had always stood on, the sense that Harry was someone who needed him, who was grateful for him, who leaned on his particular warmth and ordinary certainty, that ground had shifted, not been removed, settled, into something that wasn't need so much as acknowledgement. Harry knew Ron was there. He was glad Ron was there. But he didn't require Ron there in the way that had, Ron now understood, been the foundation of what he'd thought the friendship was. Harry had the Black family's institutional weight. He had Hermione's precision. He had Creature's archive and Walburga's counsel. He had, since July, a formal political declaration and a retired Wisengamot judge on retainer. Ron was a friend. He used to feel like a cornerstone. He turned over in the dark and did not sleep for a long time. The tea was always good. This was part of it, the way small comforts were deployed precisely enough to produce the feeling of being cared for without requiring anything as blunt as actual caring. Dumbledore invited him under the guise of well-being checks. You've been through a great deal this year. You all have, and you're closest to Harry. I rely on that, Ron. More than you know. The eyes over the half-moon spectacles, warm and attentive, focused on Ron's face with the concentration that made you feel, for the duration of it, like the most important person in the conversation. How do you think Harry is managing? Dumbledore asked in the third meeting, setting down his teacup with the particular care of a man about to say something that mattered. He's carrying a great deal, more than I would have wished for him. I worry sometimes that the Black family history is a burden no 15-year-old should be asked to carry. Ron said Harry seemed fine. He said it with the confidence he had available, which was becoming, meeting by meeting, slightly less than what he'd started with. Yes, Dumbledore said. He presents very well, a pause too shaped to be accidental. You know him better than anyone, Ron, better than I do. If you ever felt he needed, if you ever felt concerned, I hope you know my door is always open. Ron walked back to Gryffindor Tower, with the tea still warm in his chest and a new weight behind his sternum that he couldn't name yet. He told himself it was concern. It was what best friends did. They watched for things. It was a role that was specifically his, in a family of 7 children, where specifically his was not always easy to locate. Draco said it quietly, almost as an aside, in the 30-second window between the end of class and the dispersal into the corridor. He caught Ron's arm, not roughly, nearly accidentally, and said it the way things are said when the speaker has decided that the casualness is the point. Your family has been in debt to the Blacks for generations, Weasley. Not malicious, almost conversational. My father looked it up. It's in the ancestral record. Every favor your dad called in at the ministry, every time he needed something moved through channels that weren't available to him directly, he let it sit for exactly 1 moment. Do you think Potter doesn't know? Do you think he hasn't read the mirror? Do you think he doesn't have a price in mind for all of it? A pause, the length of something being set down on a table, just something to consider. He walked away. Ron stood in the corridor while students moved around him and thought about what he knew, which was that Draco was a liar and an instrument of his father's politics and not to be trusted under any circumstances, and he thought about what he didn't know, which was whether any specific part of it was true, and the distance between those two positions was a very specific kind of silence. He didn't ask Harry. He told himself he would ask later, when there was a moment, when it felt less. He simply didn't ask Harry. He was afraid the answer would be careful and precise and would tell him, in the negative space of what was not said, more than he wanted to know. The seed didn't need to be true to grow. That was as Draco understood, and Ron was only beginning to. The point. Hermione had identified the mechanism in September, sitting with the educational decrees spread across the Grimmauld library table while Creature brought tea without being asked. Umbridge's Decree 24 prohibited all student groups, teams, and organized meetings of 3 or more students without faculty approval. The language was absolute, designed to be comprehensive, written to leave no gap. What it was not cross-referenced against, what its drafters had apparently not thought to consult, were the ancient Houses Compact documents that govern the educational rights of students holding recognized noble titles within institutions founded under pre-ministry charters. The Black family's involvement in Hogwarts was older than the ministry's oversight structures, endowments, ward contracts, governance influence, a century of institutional investment that had created, without anyone apparently noticing, a category of governance documentation that predated Umbridge's authority entirely. The Lord of the Black Seat, Hermione argued in her filing, held standing that the educational decrees had failed to account for. The decrees governed Hogwarts students under ministry authority. The Hogwarts foundational documents granted noble house lordships an exemption from blanket educational restrictions that materially affected their ancestral magical practice. Harry filed the challenge through the Wisengam countersigning. Decree 24 was stayed for Black Seat students pending full committee review. The ministry found itself with an educational ban that could not technically be applied to one student, because one student had filed the correct paperwork in the correct sequence with the correct legal representation. Umbridge received notice by Owl. She read it at the staff table. Her face did something specific that Harry observed from across the Great Hall with mild professional interest. Wizengamot observers were permitted in the gallery. Lucius Malfoy attended as an observer, which was his right, and which Harry had anticipated when he'd selected the hearing date. Hermione's argument took 3 minutes, not because it was insufficient, because it was complete. She laid the legal architecture in the order it needed to be laid, without embellishment, without the rhetorical performance that invited counter-argument. She cited precedents in the sequence Penhaligon had recommended. She addressed the ministry's likely objections before they were raised, which had the effect of foreclosing them before they could be spoken. Then she set a single piece of paper on the petitioner's table. The committee will note, she said, that the ministry's own employment file for Dolores Jane Umbridge, High Inquisitor, shows that her placement at Hogwarts was made at the personal recommendation of Lucius Abraxas Malfoy, current Wizengamot member. A clean pause, like a ruled line, dated August the 3rd of this year. The piece of paper lay on the table. The clerk picked it up. He passed it to the committee members, who read it in the way of people confirming something they had not known, but were now unable to unknow. The paper moved along the row. Each committee member read it. Each committee member looked up briefly before looking down again. The gallery was very quiet. Harry was seated at the petitioner's table. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the space where Lucius Malfoy was sitting, with the specific rigidity of a man upon whom 50 people had simultaneously, without looking at him, turned an invisible light. Harry kept his eyes on the clerk. He kept them there and let the moment breathe. Let the piece of paper do what pieces of paper do when they contain the right information in the right room with the right people reading. The debt does the threatening. You don't have to. 3 years ago, in a restricted room off Hogwarts' 4th-floor corridor, a woman in a portrait had said it to a 12-year-old who had been writing everything down in the margins of everything he read. The 12-year-old had listened. The 15-year-old at the petitioner's table had not forgotten a word. The committee found in favor of the challenge. The stay was extended pending full review. The hearing was adjourned. Harry collected his copy of the document and left the chamber at the same pace he always walked. Behind him, in the gallery, Lucius Malfoy did not speak. There was nothing, in the space the document had created, left to say. Harry arrived at Grimmauld Place 3 hours after the Department of Mysteries. He had not been given a choice about leaving. Dumbledore had moved people very efficiently in the aftermath, the way Dumbledore moved people when the situation required efficiency rather than comfort. But Harry had not gone where he was directed. He had gone where he was lured. The house accepted him the way it always did, immediately. Without ceremony, he went to the drawing room and sat in Sirius's chair and looked at the tapestry. The burned-off space where Sirius's name had been was filled, not with fresh ink, with restored threads as though the fabric had been waiting for the right moment to complete itself. Sirius Orion Black, 1959 to 1996. Below it, in the smaller notation the tapestry used for epitaphs the ancestral magic considered, earned, he served well in the end. Harry looked at this for a long time. He had been 30 seconds too late. He had heard Bellatrix laughing from the doorway. He had understood what the laughter meant before he crossed the threshold, and the understanding had arrived not as grief but as fact. The way important facts arrive when you have been trained to receive them as information rather than impact. The grief came later. Slowly, which was worse than quickly. It came in early mornings when he reached the study and saw the window that faced the garden, and remembered that Sirius had liked that window for its light, had stood at it with tea and said nothing. Just stood there being alive and free in the specific way of a man who did not take either of those things for granted. He did not howl. He sat in the chair which was fully his now, head of house and lord of the seat simultaneously, the authority undivided for the first time. And he let the grief be what it was, which was the specific weight of a man who had stepped aside and witnessed and done the work of bearing witness, and been, at the end, exactly what he'd promised. The last thing he offered Regulus was the promise to watch his son claim what was his. He had kept it. Harry put his hand flat on the table. He stayed until it was dark. Dumbledore had been patient with Ron, which was how Harry understood later that Dumbledore had identified Ron's specific vulnerability months before he used it. Patience of that caliber was not care. It was targeting. Ron passed the information in October. He did not think of it as passing information. He thought of it as telling a trusted adult that his friend was spending evenings in the restricted section with notes Ron could not read, and that the librarian had confirmed were in a cipher associated with very old, very specific magical practice. He thought of it as concern. He thought of it as his role, the one he had been given, meeting by meeting over cups of excellent tea. He mentioned the location of Harry's restricted section working notes. Dumbledore arranged for the notes to be reviewed by the Order's grey magic consultant, a woman named Pendrith who worked under a ministry contract. Her assessment arrived as, the subject is pursuing practice consistent with the darker traditions of the Black family. Continued monitoring recommended. The assessment traveled from Pendrith through an old arrangement with Mundungus Fletcher, who owed Pendrith a favor from 1989. Mundungus passed it through Aberforth to two Wizengamot members who sat on the Committee for the Regulation of Ancestral Practice. They filed a formal inquiry against the Lord of the Black Seat in November, citing concern about a minor engaging in unsupervised ancestral magic of unknown classification. 4 links, 4 weeks, a chain assembled from debts and favors, and one person's misguided certainty that he was protecting someone he loved. She found it in the Mirror's ledger on a Saturday. The Mirror tracked debt signatures. Every exchange that moved through channels connected to Black family debts left a residue in the record, the way ink stains stone even after the ink is gone. She had been using it for 2 years to map political relationships. She had not expected to find what she found, a chain of activated favors, each link time-stamped, running from October 14th to November 3rd, terminating at the Wizengamot inquiry filing. She traced it backward, link by link. Pendrith to Mundungus, a 1989 debt, discharged in October. Mundungus to Aberforth, a 1993 debt, discharged the same week. Aberforth to the committee members. 2 favors, both called in within 4 days of each other. The first link in the chain was a different category. Not a formal debt, an information transfer, informal, unrecorded in the Mirror's primary ledger, but the Mirror was sensitive to exchanges that moved adjacent to Black Seat affairs, and the ghost trace was there. Someone had spoken to Dumbledore, someone had provided the location of Harry's notes, someone who had access to that information and who had been having regular private meetings with Dumbledore since the September of the previous year. She sat with the evidence for 2 days. She did not tell Harry for 2 days, because some information requires the full weight of its own truth to settle before it can be given to someone else. She sat with it and verified it and checked her reasoning against the Mirror 3 times, and the Mirror said the same thing each time. Then she told Harry. Harry found Ron between dinner and curfew. He said, "Did you tell anyone about my library sessions?" Ron's face gave the answer before his words did. The answer lived in the specific way the color left his face, in the small motion of his jaw that was the beginning of several different sentences, none of which arrived in the right order. Then he tried to explain. He was worried. He didn't think it would. He wasn't trying to. He thought he was. Harry held up a hand. "You decided I needed to be watched," he said. "Level, not cold, exact. You went to the person most interested in controlling me, without asking me first, without giving me the opportunity to explain what I was working on, or why, or to tell you that what you were worried about had already been accounted for." He held Ron's gaze, steadily, the way the whispering Mirror held a record, without judgment, without heat, with only the precision of what was true. "I'm not angry at you. I understand exactly what you thought you were doing. You thought you were protecting me. You were wrong about what that required and wrong about who to trust with the concern, but I understand the intention. Ron said, Harry, you made a choice, Harry said. It had consequences for the black seat. Hermione is going to explain the legal implications now. He stepped back. He had said everything there was to say in that register. Hermione stepped forward. The Soul Ward required no raised voices, no ceremony. It required the Black Codex open to Chapter 12, 3 anchoring runes inscribed on the doorframe of the nearest black property entrance. Harry had keyed his dormitory door to the Black Seat wards in September, a precaution that had seemed excessive at the time, and the arch scholar of the house to administer it because the Codex was specific on this point. The ward could not be performed by someone personally betrayed by the subject. Harry had been personally betrayed. The Codex barred him. Hermione qualified. Her betrayal was real and institutional rather than personal. The Codex distinguished between the two with the precision of a document written by people who understood that institutional injuries required institutional responses and personal injuries required something else entirely. She stood at the doorframe. She performed the ritual without flourish. That, too, was the Codex's requirement. The ward was not punishment. It was a state. It was the house becoming permanently closed to someone who had made themselves incompatible with it. No appeal, no term, no reversal clause. Ron watched it happen with the expression of a man watching something he had believed was impossible being demonstrated with complete mechanical clarity to be possible. When it was done, the runes sealed, the ward active, the Codex closed, he said very quietly, "We were his friends." Hermione looked at him for a long moment, not unkindly, with the specific attention of a person choosing their words because the words were going to be the last ones and they needed to be true. "You were," she said. "I still am." A pause, the length of a distinction being drawn. Those aren't the same thing anymore. She picked up the Codex. She left the corridor without looking back. Harry did not look back either. Snape came at night, which was practical. He was a fugitive in the technical sense, and the daylight hours were no longer available to him. He knocked once, which the house accepted because Harry had anticipated this visit and left the front ward open for it. He did not explain himself. He offered no account of the tower, or why or what it had cost him. He came into the study and stood on the near side of the desk and looked at Harry with the cold, professional neutrality he had maintained since September of Year 5, and he set an envelope on the desk. The envelope was old. The paper had yellowed at the edges. The wax seal cracked along its fold from years of being preserved rather than opened. The handwriting on the front was not Snape's. "Severus, in case I don't come back." Harry looked at the handwriting for a moment. He knew the pen strokes. He had been reading them since he was 11. "Your father was the bravest man I knew," Snape said. His voice was very quiet. Not grief exactly. Grief had been in Snape for so long it had become architecture rather than weather, something load-bearing. "He gave me 2 things, information that saved lives, and a letter that I've kept for 17 years. He did not elaborate on the information or the lives or the 17 years. He set what he had come to set and said what he had come to say. I'm giving it to you now." He left. Harry opened the envelope. 3 pages in Regulus's compressed and rapid handwriting, the pen strokes of a person who was always short on time. A debrief. Every Horcrux Regulus had been able to confirm across a year of Death Eater service: the ring, the locket, the diary, the cup. A precise description of the cave, the basin, the potion, the Inferi, the mechanics of the trap. Notes in the margins about what the Inferi would and would not respond to, written with the clinical specificity of someone who had been inside the trap and survived long enough to document it. And at the bottom of the 3rd page, in handwriting slightly different from the rest, written after the letter to Snape was sealed, added in the final minutes before something there was no coming back from: "If my son survives, give him this. He'll know what to do." Harry read it twice. He folded it along its original creases, careful, the same motion he had used with the first letter, the same preservation, and placed it beside the Codex. He sat in the dark study, in Regulus's chair, at Regulus's desk, in the house that had been waiting since 1979 for the right blood to occupy it. His father had planned this from the beginning, had written for the possibility of a son before the son existed, had trusted the magic to find the moment, and the moment had found him. The account was not yet settled, but it was close. He would know what to do. He already did. The Horcrux hunt was not what anyone would have expected it to be. It was, primarily, paperwork. Hermione had spent the first weeks of Year 7 in the Grimmauld Library with Regulus's debrief and the Black Codex and the Whispering Mirror, and a notebook that had accumulated by December over 400 pages of cross-referenced notes. The debrief had given them the intelligence. The mirror had given them the financial and magical architecture connecting each Horcrux to the violation of exchange that had created it. The Codex had given them the mechanism. Each Horcrux was stolen property, not in the conventional sense, in the gray magic sense. They had been made by violating the natural exchange system that all magic at its oldest level operated through. You take a life without consent, you have taken something that was never yours to take. The magic of death registers this. The debt exists whether or not anyone chooses to call it. Harry filed the calls. Hermione drafted the filings, 6 months of Wizengamot submissions, ancestral claim documents, magical property law that most practicing wizards had never encountered, and that the Wizengamot's clerks had to locate in storage rooms unopened for decades. The Ministry, under Death Eater control, ignored every filing without exception. This was the expected outcome. The filings were not addressed to the Ministry. They were addressed to the magic itself, which had always been the point of gray magic from the beginning. In gray magic, an acknowledged claim creates a lien. The Ministry's silence was irrelevant. The magic heard. When they located and destroyed each Horcrux, the ring found in the Gaunt Shack through the mirror's debt signature map, the cup removed from the Lestrange vault through Gringotts' legal authority and a Black family warrant, the diadem located in the Room of Requirement through ancestral ward sense, Nagini the last and most carefully handled, the soul fragment extracted by force of claim in an operation that left the snake alive. And Voldemort one anchor lighter, the destructions registered not as acts of magical violence, but as enforcement of valid liens. The distinction mattered enormously for what came after. Voldemort chose the location. That was the first thing to note. He had become, in the last months of the war, increasingly focused on the Black bloodline. The third side had denied him a soul fragment. The Black bloodline had invoked his inferi against him at this very site. Black family legal filings had placed claims on his Horcruxes. A lord and his arch-scholar had built, from ancient texts and one old mirror and a retired Wizengamot judge, a political entity that stood apart from both sides of the war simultaneously and had dismantled his immortality through procedure rather than confrontation. He chose the graveyard because he considered it the place he had won. The previous confrontation. Harry had returned to Hogwarts from that graveyard carrying Cedric's body, and Voldemort had risen, and that had been, in Voldemort's accounting, his victory. He had not accounted for what else had happened at this graveyard. He had not accounted for 18 years of accumulated debt. Harry arrived at dusk, alone as Voldemort's message had specified, and as Harry had agreed to for reasons Voldemort had not been given. He walked between the bone-white gravestones and stood in the open space near the center. Voldemort arrived with the specific theatrical confidence of a man who had arranged a scene and believed the arrangement complete. "You came alone," Voldemort said. "Yes," Harry said. "So did you." He reached into his robe pocket and took out the Black Codex, not to show it, to use it. He had the page marked with black ribbon since February, when Hermione had found the lines in the marginalia of the grimoire's oldest section, written in a hand older than Walburga's, older than any documented Black family record, in the compressed notation of someone who had understood the gray magic system from the inside, and left instructions for whoever would eventually need them. The sacrifice binding's due date clause. 3 lines, an invocation addressed not to Voldemort, but to the magic of the exchange itself. The exchange Regulus had entered when he drank the potion in the cave, and commanded Creature to leave, and offered his life in return for the promise of Voldemort's destruction. The terms had never been fulfilled. The binding had been accumulating for 18 years, unpaid, the way debts accumulate when no one is willing to settle them. Harry read the 3 lines. The sacrifice stands, the creditor is present. Let the debt fulfill its terms. His voice was level. He said it the way Walburga had taught him to name a price, without heat, without theater, with only the weight of what was true. The sky did not change, there was no explosion, no visible discharge of magic, no dramatic response from the air or the graves or the ground underfoot. The graveyard went very quiet. Voldemort raised his wand. He spoke the killing curse. Nothing happened. Not because the curse had been blocked, because the magic that should have been available to him, the final piece of his soul, the one he kept in his own body, the one he had believed was safe because it was not an object that could be found and filed against, had already begun to move. It was fulfilling Regulus's terms. The Black family vault was very old and very deep, and built in 1979 by a 20-year-old who stood in a cave with water in his lungs and a dead man's potion in his blood to receive exactly this. The soul fragment moved toward the vault the way everything in gray magic moved toward the settlement of its terms. Not fast, not slow, with a direction that was not going to change. Voldemort's expression moved through something that Harry did not look away from. He observed because he had been taught to observe, because observation was the first discipline and the last one. Then Voldemort was a man of 70 in a body magically reconstructed, and already failing because the magic of the reconstruction was predicated on the presence of soul fragments that were no longer present. The red eyes lost their color. The proportions settled towards something more human and considerably more frail. He became, in the course of several minutes that felt nothing like minutes, what he had always been beneath the architecture, a frightened man from an orphanage who had fought his own mortality for 50 years and had now definitively lost. He was not a martyr, he was not a legend. He died on the ground of his father's grave, without an audience, without a speech, without a prophecy. It was not satisfying in the way that battles are satisfying. It was satisfying in the way that closing a very long account finally is. Which was, Harry understood as he stood in the quiet graveyard with the codex in his hand, the only kind of satisfaction that was real. 6 months later, Lucius Malfoy stood in the center of the chamber in his most expensive robes, which was the choice of a man who had decided that presentation could still function as armor. The charges were Death Eater activity, conspiracy, the facilitation of Voldemort's operations through financial and magical channels disguised as business transactions. The prosecutorial evidence included oral testimony, witness accounts, and one document submitted by the Lord of the Black Seat, 23 pages. Every debt interaction between the House of Malfoy and the House of Black from 1975 onward, every undischarged debt, every favor called, every exchange that had moved through channels Lucius had considered invisible. The Whispering Mirror had seen all of it, the mirror had recorded all of it. Hermione had spent 18 months translating the record into a format the Wizengamot's evidentiary rules would accept. In gray magic law, an undischarged debt incurred in connection with a criminal enterprise was transferable to the heir of the creditor as evidence of that enterprise. The debt record did not simply show Lucius's connections, it was the connections, made visible, filed, witnessed, and presented without a single word of testimony from the person who had compiled it. Harry did not testify. He submitted the document. He sat at the petitioner's table while the document was read and distributed and discussed, and he looked at the Wizengamot clerk, and he let the paper do the work that paper does when it contains the right information in the right room. The vote was called, 41 for conviction, 7 against, 3 abstentions. In the moment after the count was announced, Lucius looked across the chamber at Harry. It was the look of a man who had believed for 23 years that the debt to the Black family was manageable, that the creditor would not collect, would not find the right instrument, would not outlast him. Harry was already looking at Hermione. She was reviewing a second file, the next account. The work did not pause for the settlement of individual debts. It continued, because that was the nature of a seat that had been accumulating records since before the ministry existed, and would continue accumulating them long after this chamber had emptied and refilled and emptied again. The mirror's ledger, open on the table beside her second file, showed 1 line resolved to 0. There was no triumph in Harry's expression. There was not supposed to be. Snape paused at the door on his way out. He had testified briefly and precisely, confirming the Black family debt record's validity as a direct witness to several of the exchanges the mirror had captured. He had then submitted his resignation from every official position he had ever held, effective immediately without apparent regret. He paused by Harry's table. He looked at the black signet ring on Harry's right hand. He looked at it with the expression of a man who has been carrying a particular weight for a long time and has just set it down and is not yet accustomed to the absence of it. "Your father would have been proud," he said, barely audible, "both of them." He did not wait for a response. He was gone before Harry could form one. The chamber emptied, the clerks filed their records, the gallery cleared. Harry sat at the petitioner's table in the silence that follows the close of very old accounts, with the black codex in his bag and the mirror's ledger balanced to 0 for the first time in decades. He reached into his inside robe pocket and took out the letter. The first one, the one from the vault, the one that had started everything, folded 3 times, the crease lines worn soft from 7 years of being opened and refolded and carried and read again. He read the last line. I did not think there would be a son. I am glad. I am sorry. Both are true. Harry folded the letter carefully along its original creases. He put it back. He stood. He closed the account. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.